That is the thing about the modern industry. It's that there is a severe lack of, ironically, diverse political commentary. And by that I mean games that aren't afraid to actually explore the full gamut of the political spectrum. When a new game comes out, I immediately think, is this game going to be paused? Is it going to be lecturing me or making me feel like, as a straight white male gamer, I am not invited to the party? I'm a dinosaur and I need to fuck off. And that is the general vibe I've been getting from the industry for quite a while now. Probably coming up to almost a decade. It's really hard to pinpoint when the pause really started to creep in. Gamergate was like an inflection point when it came to the culture war in general. And obviously there's this macro trend going on with Trump, the Trump movement, the dissident right, and a lot of that kind of ties into Gamergate, as I've mentioned before in my previous videos, but that was a reaction. And there was a few years before Gamergate kicked off where the journos were pushing a hardcore far-left viewpoint and agenda onto the industry. And devs that did not play ball with them got terrible press. That was going on for quite a few years, so it must be coming on to about 10 years of industry pause, possibly longer, give or take. And this has directly resulted in a period of complete stagnation and a massive lack of creativity, huge deficit of innovation. The industry has suffered as a whole from this, I guess you could call it a salting campaign, which is something I learned recently. It's this leftist technique where they infiltrate communities, and not just things like, Magic the Gathering, comic books, even things like unions. I mean, this happened back in the 60s. It's that you have infiltrators who sow discord. They may not even be fully cognizant of what they're doing. They're simply, a demoralized, useful idiot, as Yuri Bezmenov would put it. This type of person is absolutely integral to far leftists actually gaining control, because you need these people acting as the intellectual foot soldiers of the movement. I get comments all the times telling me that, I don't understand Marxism, I don't understand communism because of, my just calling it out and saying it sucks. The fact that I can't quote Das Kapital in its entirety to you, just from memory, does not invalidate my critique, or any of the number of people pointing out just how shitty these ideas are. And, look, I'm not saying that capitalism is somehow the perfect system, but labor theory of value is baloney. It doesn't make sense, okay? Labor theory of value would have you believe that the atomic particle of economic value is labor, and it's capitalism that is forcing upon us this dialectic that enslaves the worker. Okay, no, you can't have value without demand, okay? So, sorry, comrade, demand is the true driving force of economics and actually validates the free market theory that the West was founded on. Marxism is based on fundamentally an egghead word salad that is used to constantly justify the worst possible behavior by very bitter, very self-loathing, nihilistic, atheist bugmen as a means to feel morally superior. Their entire movement consists of people that are total morons, and they don't even really understand any of the underpinnings of the ideology that they hold water for. And then you have guys like Vaush, who are genuinely malevolent midwits who derive some kind of narcissistic power trip from the ideology, while treating the core text as dogma. And it's this class of leftists that a lot of journalists, and especially game journalists, seem to belong to. It's these types of people that really do end up salting the earth when it comes to communities, because that is their purpose. And it's happened to video games, just like it happened in almost every facet of our traditional culture. It's political action intended to incapacitate the target. So I feel personally that the video game industry was targeted for a salting campaign. And the journalists, they've allied with the new generation of devs. And it's just been a complete purge of any viewpoint slightly to the right, even to the center. And keep in mind, this is an industry that historically was very libertarian. At least in the Western industry. Like back in the 90s, you had guys like John Carmack and John Romero, who they had this very defiant, rebellious attitude. They were Gen Xers, they ate pizza, they drank beer, and they played badass video games with their bros. And that's kind of what it was about. And it's like, hey, we're doing our own thing. We're forging our own path. We're creating our own industry. And we're playing games that cater to what we want, which is, big guns, violence, hypermasculine power fantasy, unapologetic, playfully offending the neoconservative values of the, George Bush Sr. 90s era. That's awesome. And that was the American 90s video game industry. Now, if you take Japan at the same time, for instance, they were far ahead of America and Europe when it came to the technology. But in terms of ethos, I'd say, way more implicitly right-wing, because look at all of the games coming out of Japan. They all have this kind of almost imperialistic, monarchistic vibe. Especially the fantasy stuff, like Final Fantasy, for instance, the early ones anyway. It's like they fuse their own Shinto, Buddhist kind of philosophy and sense of tradition with this fascination with the West. And what you ended up getting was a lot of very monarchistic vibes, always the reverence for the king, the warrior, the hero. The original Final Fantasy protagonist was known as the Warrior of Light, right? And how fucking based does that sound? That's fantastic. And Final Fantasy is one of my favorite series because there's a lot of good content there. There's a lot of real, archetypal basedness to this series. Even the later ones that I don't even like that much. Final Fantasy 15, you have this technological, magical monarchy, right? Ruled by this bloodline of royalty. And, you're the prince, but your father is this beloved king. It's not undermining the concept of Western monarchy. It's actually celebrating it. And that game came out a couple of years ago, so that shows you that Japan still retains that DNA that it had with the old way that the industry used to do things, because there's that core, and it comes from the tradition of Western fantasy as well. If you stretch it back, you have D&D, and then further back you have Tolkien, stuff like that. So this is why gaming is fucking awesome, and it should be awesome again. If anything, gaming deserves to be made great again, because for fuck's sakes, the potential squandered over the last however many decade, 15 years, is so heartbreaking to me. Because even the Western industry, up until fairly recently, used to come out with some incredibly based content. Even, when you compare it to modern Hollywood, Hollywood has been utterly cocked for way longer than gaming. But look at Skyrim, for instance. That came out in 2011. That's developed by Bethesda, who now, we've all lost faith in Bethesda, obviously. They seem to be this corporate-controlled, anti-consumer trash heap these days. And Elder Scrolls 6, wow. I've just been trained. I'm like Pavlov's dog. Every time I hear that there's going to be a new game from a series that I used to like, I immediately feel sick. And, my hype levels for both Starfield and Elder Scrolls 6, right now, it's a flat line. And it just has to be this way, because one of these days I'm going to be pleasantly surprised. And I really hope Starfield is not a complete garbage fire, because, hey, sci-fi open world RPG, we need a good one of those. We need a good one of those after Cyberpunk. But the sad thing is, Bethesda used to be absolutely based back in the day, as recently as 2011. Look at Skyrim. The Stormcloak path through the main story is absolutely edgy as far as I'm concerned. It's very spicy, because look what you got here. You got militant Nord ethno-nationalists that are absolutely tired of multiculturalism in Skyrim. And Ulfric, obviously, he wants the Lords of Skyrim to unite behind him so he can expel the Empire. The Empire are basically puppeted by the Aldemari Dominion, who are elves, right? And these elves, they are the unseen hand that has big plans for Skyrim, and it's not about what the people want, right? The elves have their own agenda. So, bravo Bethesda. But hey, look at, for instance, New Vegas. That's another one, obviously published by Bethesda, but it's a Obsidian RPG, if you want to get autistic about it. And it shows you how based Obsidian used to be in comparison to the House of Pause that they've turned into now. Where, Obsidian can't get enough of virtue signaling how woke they are these days. But New Vegas, you could roleplay politically in that game. You could be a fucking Roman fascist in that game. And, even factions like the NCR, they're hardcore American nationalists, and they want to impose order on the wasteland via, martial might. And yeah, I guess they're the closest thing to a libertarian force that you can get, because they want to revive the values of the old America, right? They're constitutionalists at the end of the day. But then you have Mr. House, too. He is like this truly Randian objectivist, kind of Howard Hughes, Walt Disney analog who seeks to control the wasteland through his technology. And, I could go on, like the Brotherhood of Steel. They're like neo-Luddites, aren't they? They have this kind of knight monastic honor system that they have. They want to preserve the technology for themselves, keep it out of the hands of the masses for their own safety. And they have like an almost Kaczynskian outlook, which is that, technology was mankind's downfall. Therefore, they must control it. They must keep it out of the hands of those who would misuse technology. So I like that. That's interesting. And it's funny because almost all the factions in New Vegas have a kind of a right-wing spin, as would make sense in a post-apocalyptic world, right? Compare that setting to Last of Us Part 2, where it is just a intersectionalist wank fantasy, where evil Christian seraphites are going around smashing people's faces in and persecuting LGBTQ individuals. And it's really a sign of the times. It's a sign that the Western industry is kind of a lost cause. The only thing that would save it at this point is utter collapse so that we can rebuild. But luckily, we still have Japan. And for me, the thing that keeps me going is probably the mysterious Elden Ring project from Hidetaka Miyazaki, creator of Dark Souls, in collaboration with George R.R. Martin, funnily enough, who's writing the lore for the game, which I don't know what to make of yet. Could be cool, could be cringe. Hard to tell at this point, but he's only writing the deep lore. So Miyazaki will take that, he'll run with it. And Miyazaki really is a special developer, in my opinion. He's basically single-handedly keeping my faith alive that video games can still be good. And I mean, just take any of his games from the past 10 years. Dark Souls came out in the same year, in the same month, in fact, as Skyrim. But as, we watched Bethesda degenerate into just corporate, commercial, anti-consumer shit, From Software have just continued to release games that absolutely resonate with me. It's that melancholy vibe. It feels like the decline of the West, honestly. We do feel like the Nietzschean last man, walking through this shadow of a world in decline. The Age of Fire may be coming to an end, and the only question is, what are we willing to sacrifice to keep it going for a little longer?